Hello, dear patrons. Welcome to another episode of Writing Beauties, in which I give writing advice to all you aspiring writers out there. One of the things I'm often praised for in writing my fics is the way I write dialogue. And I would have to agree, dialogue is one of my strengths and favorite parts about writing. And I tend to get bored with stories I read if they don't have enough interesting dialogue. You see, as a kid, I was very shy and didn't talk much with people that I wasn't close to, which sounds ironic if I write dialogue a lot. But you see, when I was alone, I had a habit of talking to myself a lot. Or when playing with my toys or friends, I'd essentially narrate our imaginary adventures. Stories felt more real to me when I heard them aloud. From that, when coming up with scenes that were very heavy in dialogue, I often voiced them aloud, slightly changing my voice accordingly, so I could hear what the lines in my head were like when spoken aloud. Sometimes I will just write down the dialogue instead of the whole scene, and then write the tags and the actions later. Being so quiet when in class or at a party helped me learn more about dialogue, because I would listen to other people talking, how each person had different tones, inflections, certain words that they used repeatedly without realizing it, such as, like, basically, you know. Not everyone will say yes, but yeah, okay, alright, fine, right, okay, or use all these synonyms but for different situations or people. For instance, your speech would be more formal when you're talking with your boss. Yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Or more casual when you're talking with a close friend or relative. Yeah, bro, yeah, mate, yeah, man, yeah, girl, that's cool. Even just little words like that can tell you a lot about a character and their relationships with other characters. All this seems natural to me, because I've also had lots of practice on my own, working on my audio dramas that are strictly dialogue. But I see that this is where many young and upcoming writers struggle. I've been reading lots of fan fiction in quarantine, and I will often quit within the first few paragraphs if the dialogue is poorly written, especially if it's ill-formatted. It's hard to explain formatting without visual representation, but the most important point I'd like to make is don't clutter all your dialogue in one paragraph. If you've ever read a book, you'll find it's much more organized than that. And if you haven't read a book, I really suggest you do, because you can't really learn to write without reading first. When a new person starts speaking, you start a new paragraph. You shouldn't have more than one person speaking in one paragraph. It will confuse the reader as to who is talking. And make good use of dialogue tags, which is a fancy term for he said, she said. Make sure it's clear who is speaking. Put the Susie said within the line of dialogue. Do the same for Sammy says when he says something. Also, you'll want to dress up the tags a bit so that they're not repetitive. It might get kind of boring if it goes she said, he said, she said, he said over and over again. Also, so you don't have talking heads when it's just dialogue and nothing is really happening. Have a little action going on in the scene. Even just little things like a character twiddling their fingers or they're sweating hard to convey a character's emotions. Don't worry about using said so much. Some English teachers will tell you to use fancy synonyms like dictated or stated and not use said at all. That is fine and all, but if you overdo it or avoid said altogether, that can take the readers out of the story, and it sounds pretentious. So if you use words like stated, dictated, use them sparingly. You can also use adverbs to help convey how things are said, such as calmly, worriedly, loudly, but don't use these too much either, or else you'll still get repetitive if you use adverbs with every other tag. It'll become expected. She said blankly. She said blankly. Only use it if you think it is necessary to convey an emotion. Or if you are tired of using said, you can use words that describe volume, like whispered and shouted. Not pretentious, but totally plausible. And you can use these instead of saying, she said loudly or she said quietly. But try not to shoehorn in big vocabulary words, or it's not going to sound natural. Or in some cases, you don't have to use a said word at all. You can just stop after a sentence with a quote and put in action. Such as, quote, I am hungry, period, unquote. Sally rubbed her tummy. Tags can go at the beginning, middle, or end. And this can make it seem a lot less repetitive too. Just make sure you know the difference between when you should use commas and when you should use periods. You can look up the proper punctuation on the internet if you are unsure, but it's really hard to explain without visual aid. Or just look in your favorite book and see how that is done. Some writers struggle with dialogue because when people are speaking, barely anything is happening in heavy dialogue scenes. But that's the purpose of good, engaging dialogue. It makes something happen in a scene where essentially nothing is happening. My favorite kind of scene to write, and something I tend to put into my works a lot, is a scene where characters have a heart-to-heart. It's not always deep, but sometimes it can just be simple bonding over idle chat. This type of dialogue may be laid back and natural, but every word is significant to the story and the characters. Like, one of my favorite scenes to write in the Daughter of Discord fanfic was a scene between Twilight Sparkle and Screwball, where Twilight is giving Screwball some advice. We learn Twilight's feelings about Screwball and her worries for the future, and also Screwball's insecurities as well. I mostly refer to fanfic writing in this series because that's where I see many young writers today testing their skills. Those who haven't had as much practice, it really shows. Not too long ago, I started reading a fanfic and I couldn't finish the first chapter. This was because within the first 2,000 words, roughly 10 pages, the protagonist spills their entire life story to other characters in this huge information dump of a paragraph with no interruptions from anyone else. It was more like a soliloquy than dialogue. It just pulled me out of the story and I just closed the window. That attempt at dialogue is unrealistic. Think about it. What person do you know spills their entire life story upon first meeting someone? Their hopes, their fears, their favorite color, their childhood traumas. Actually, I know 2 people like that, and it's an unbearable trait. Hardly anyone has the attention span to take in all those details at once. And if that's all that's happening, one person talking, it gets boring. Unless that's what you're going for with a character, for them to be unbearable, but in this case, I don't think that's what the author was going for. And also, if it's a dramatic monologue in a play. It's a different medium altogether, though. If you're gonna have a big confession like that, break it up a bit. Have the speaker pause to take a breath, show their movements or inner thoughts, have other characters interrupt or ask questions. Better yet, spread the big revealing information across multiple scenes, not dump it all at once. And then there's more of a mystery and intrigue to it. Start with information that the character is not afraid to share and information that is important for the reader to know. If the character has secrets, it will affect what they will say and what they will hide. People don't always say what they will think or be so easily trusting of others. Dialogue can be one way of showing without telling. You can do things with dialogue that will save you paragraphs of exposition. I've written 2 audio dramas on YouTube, which is essentially all dialogue because with radio shows, sound is all you have. I suggest listening to old radio shows like The Shadow or Sherlock Holmes and see how stories are strictly told through dialogue. It's different from stage and film scripts because you still will have to make notes on scenes and important actions in those. But yeah, if you're going into theater or TV or film or even radio, you're gonna have to learn to write dialogue. You could probably get away with writing a short story without so much dialogue, but you can only write so much exposition in fiction without it dragging on. Another important thing to note, if you're writing in the first person, it makes the entire story dialogue, because it's as if the character is talking to the audience. So, the nature of the narration will be vastly different than in the third person. You'll want to treat it like dialogue. I will talk more about point of view in another episode. To better learn ways to write dialogue, pay attention to the movies and TV shows you watch, not just what they say, but how it's said. What do the actors do while talking? A small exercise would be to write a famous movie scene, but do it in prose. Listen to people around you, random conversations at the supermarket or cafe. To learn how to write, you've got to learn how to listen and watch. Open up all your senses so the reader can see, hear, smell, and feel what you do. Overall, writing is about finding your balance between exposition, dialogue, action, and emotions. Everyone has their own style. Not all scenes have to be dialogue heavy, but if they are, making a scene where nothing is happening engaging is a fantastical feat. Another important thing is to know your characters and how they speak, because not everyone speaks in the same way. Anyway, that is all for now. Thank you for your continuing support, and join me next month for the next episode of Writing Beauties, said DF as she signed off.